Thank you, Your Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Clinton, it is an honor to welcome you to the United Arab Emirates for the Iron Earth Summit, and a pleasure to welcome you to the Emirate of Abu Dhabi. Thank you for your informative, inspiring, and interesting speech. As we learned from your speech today, there is a strong connection between your work with the Clinton Foundation and the interests of the Iron Earth community. I've been invited here to ask you a few follow-up questions in that regard. We're particularly interested in what you think are the emissions challenges that fast-growing cities in emerging economies face, and whether or not those cities can be held accountable to the same standards and criteria given their different development stages.
Well, first of all, in most cities, as people move into the cities and there's more wealth there tends to be more greenhouse gas emissions. And our cities, for example, in the United States, about 75% of those emissions, however, come from buildings because it tends to change the pattern. What happens is more people tend to travel by mass transit or travel fewer distances. So the obvious thing to do in the cities where there's a lot of concentrated population is to look at how the buildings are powered. And I can only tell you what my experience is. My experience is that in the developed countries and in the developing countries with big cities, the buildings, the case for retrofitting the buildings and making them more efficient, although in developing countries you may also need to have a better grid. Even in America we need a better grid. That's the most economically viable way to begin. Meanwhile, I think we need to be exploring all the other options. I believe one of my dreams is that I know it won't be realized quite in this way. It depends on how long I'm allowed to live, but I wish in my lifetime we could get rid of every landfill in every big city in the world and recycle all the plastic, metal, and glass, providing jobs for people in developing countries, give the organic material over to making fertilizer for farmers, and use the rest for energy. I wish we could maximize the geothermal position of countries that don't superficially have anything like the potential of Iceland or the Philippines, the next biggest country on earth in terms of the percentage of its load carried by geothermal. I wish we could do these things, and it's largely a question of finance. For example, in the US, if you want to build a coal-fired power plant, you get 20 years to pay for it through the regulatory system that's long been established. And so every month for 20 years, someone paying an electric bill will be paying partly for the plants and partly for the coal that goes into the plants, as well as to maintain them. We don't have anything like that kind of financing for most of the solar work we do. You get 30 years in most American states to pay for a nuclear power plant, which generates even fewer jobs in the building than coal. Nobody gets anything like 30 years. If you look at the places in the world that have had really good waste-to-energy facilities that are very environmentally responsible, they take little less than 20 years to play off. So every time I bring this up, someone will say to me, but how in the world can we get financing to pay for something that doesn't pay for itself for 17 years? And yet we do it every single day in almost all developed countries for traditional energy. So my view is you should maximize clean transportation, maximize your efforts to cut down on waste dumps and the methane emissions that come from them and use that materials, and then work on the buildings, including, as it becomes more and more economical, using as much solar and wind and other sources of clean energy as possible.
Okay. Thank you for your answer. We know that the Clinton Climate Initiative is working towards a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by promoting green buildings, recycling, clean energy, amongst many other efforts. One of the CCI programs is tasked with measuring and sharing emissions information from cities across the world, a subject very relevant to our summit today. What do you think the challenges are that fast-growing cities face in measuring and sharing emissions information?
Well, first let me say, we work with the Carbon Disclosure Project, and my foundation did, and the C40, the cities, and there are actually more than 40 now involved in this. But there are two challenges. One is, and a group called ICLEI, I-C-L-E-I, that works on getting this kind of data out there. The main challenges are there are many cities that simply don't have the capacity to do the measurements now. You have to build the capacity in a lot of these cities to do it. And the other challenge is there are many who don't understand how important it is. But this is something that's important. I think most important things to do are to do specific projects and then to prove that they're good economics, but you can't do it unless you've got the measurement capacity. So I hope that some real advances on that will come out of this, because I think it will help us to get more good projects and get more good financing. But there's the general awareness of this has gone up because of the Carbon Disclosure Project and because of the work being done by many of the cities. But there's still not I would say, a burning commitment to do this. And a lot of the places in the world where we need to do the testing just don't have the capacity. This is also, by the way, true not just in cities. We have the same challenge in trying to make all the existing mechanisms for reforestation and for halting deforestation work. And therefore, I hope that's the main thing that I hope can come out of this conference that will help all the rest of us to do the right thing as we figure out how to spend our time and efforts.
Thank you. It's evident that the lack of quality quantifiable environmental data has proven a major hindrance to the achievement of sustainable development. As a global leader, can you give us an example of where this lack of data was a major challenge?
Yeah, I can give you lots of examples, but I think it's more important in this case. It is absolutely true that the lack of data has hurt us. It is also true that it provides a convenient excuse, particularly in a time of global economic challenges, not to do this. No matter what the data is, you know you're better off with more clean energy and less dirty energy. You know you're better off if you do more recycling of resources. You know you're better off if you make buildings more efficient, if you make the electrical grid smarter. So I believe that first it's important, but I can give you lots of examples where I can cite buildings we've fixed around the world, 250 big building retrofit projects, and you saw we actually believe, because of the agreements we signed earlier, that we can measure what they've done. And it keeps us from over-claiming too. But I think the biggest challenge is that we haven't reached a critical mass in any given place that makes everybody want to do it, and there's not enough easy access to financing. And I'm not talking about gifts. I'm saying these are profitable endeavors if financed along the lines that other major energy projects are. So I would say the thing that bothers me is, number one, we don't necessarily have the capacity to do it. And I could give you lots of examples where in cities in the developing world, for example, we do our best to measure it because of the partnerships we've made. But if other people say, well, I want to do the same thing, I want to do the same thing, they may go off and not have the proper measurements. But it also provides a convenient excuse not to do anything. That's the thing I'm more concerned about. I'd rather do one project than give 10 speeches and then just send everybody a picture of the project with the results that are achieved.
Thank you for that answer. And this brings me to my final question. Your foundation has been involved in a number of post-disaster relief efforts, including in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina and post-quake Haiti. One of the important themes of the Eye on Earth Day 3 focuses on disaster management. From your point of view, how much of the consequences of these disasters, physical, financial, and emotional, can be mitigated in advance based on better planning, with better planning based on greater access to environmental and societal data?
I would say it varies from disaster to disaster, but quite a lot. For example, if we just had better early warning systems, we could have behaved more like the animals did in the tsunami. They had their own early warning systems, and they ran away from the worst of the crisis. We helped them in the Indian states most affected. They have much better early warning systems now. We have much better warning systems in Indonesia and in Sri Lanka and the other places. We have much better detectors out in the oceans themselves. So I think that's important. But I would urge you to not only think about disaster preparedness, but you could actually prevent this. For example, in the Katrina area in the United States, when Katrina hit, afterward, there was a study done about why the metal gates broke and then the levees broke. And the conclusion was that if the wetlands, which had been cleaned off and overdeveloped in the previous 30 years, if the wetlands had been in the same condition, preserved in the same condition as they were 30 years earlier, it would have cut the speed of the water in half and potentially reduced the damage of Hurricane Katrina by 90% in the New Orleans area. Now, we're just talking about in the Louisiana where it ran up and did all that damage. Then I think there's a question of how you build back. Something as simple as trying to have uniform standards in Sri Lanka about how close to the water's edge all the fishermen could build their homes is important. In New Orleans, the actor Brad Pitt and an architect named Bill McDonough and the people that were working with him, we worked with them. They designed homes that were built up on stilts but were no more expensive and were also dramatically more energy efficient. And we know that if exactly the same hurricane caused exactly the same amount of water flow, that the neighborhoods where these homes are built will be just fine now. So I think, to me, prevention is a very important part of disaster preparation and response. It's better if you don't have so much to respond to. And now, if you look at the earthquake that hit Japan and the tsunami, see, none of us are invulnerable to the forces of nature. It may be an argument. I don't know enough about the Japanese situation to know whether they could have had all those nuclear plants somewhere else. It's a fairly thin set of islands. But I don't think you can get rid of all these things. But there are a lot of these problems that I've been very impressed with what the Maldives have tried to do to try to build up the central part of their islands and build bulwarks for their cities. But keep in mind, that means they can stand tsunamis with the oceans at the current level. If the general level of the oceans rise 4 or 5 feet before there's another tsunami, then nothing can be done to protect them. So I think, you all have to think about that. But my experience is that in the aftermath of one of these things, not only the countries affected, but everybody else really needs to look at building standards. In Haiti, where I went to work in Haiti the first time for the United Nations before the earthquake, because in the year before the earthquake, 4 different hurricanes had damaged the country so badly that they lost 15% of their GDP. And I realized there was simply no uniform building standards, and that the deforestation of the country had rendered it much more vulnerable to natural phenomenon like these hurricanes. So before the earthquake, we were doing something that we're now doing again. We're rebuilding all the houses with hurricane and earthquake-resistant buildings, and we're trying to make them more energy efficient and more energy independent, so that if there is another natural disaster which paralyzes the grid, they'll still be able to have light in their homes at night so the children can study and the parents can work or do whatever they want to do. It's a very important distinction. So I like to think you can prevent a lot of this damage, and you can also ask yourself what basic functions should be able to go on almost no matter what happens. And in most places, you have options. Sri Lanka had options. Aceh in Indonesia had options. The Pacific Island nations, I think, are the most vulnerable places right now. And I think that's one of the reasons why you have some of their representatives here and why they've become ferocious advocates of doing something sensible about this challenge.
Thank you, Mr. Clinton. Thank you very much for your keen insights. We also thank you for the great work that your foundation is doing, especially in regards to the issue of open access to environmental data. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and thank you for being here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure meeting you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain